Hello, hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Count It Up. I'm David Haley. I'm the CEO of Countalytics, where we use computer vision and data to solve your inventory problems. Today on the show, we have Brandi Thomas. Hello, Brandi.
Hey, glad to be here. I'm super excited.
Oh, good. So am I. So Brandi is the Vice President of Corporate Audit and the Chief Audit Executive at Delta Airlines. Brandi and I know each other from past my time at Delta Airlines, and obviously I'm no longer there, but Brandi is holding the torch and staying strong and leading in these rough times.
That's right. In this COVID world, in this new world we're navigating.
Exactly. So we'll just start a little bit about you, Brandi. Where are you from and how did you end up in audit?
Yeah, right. So I was born and raised in Cleveland, Ohio. And usually when I say that, there's some sort of joke afterwards, either about the Browns or the time that the river caught on fire or something like that. But I'm a Midwest girl, born and raised in Cleveland, Ohio, and really spent, my entire life there up through, my early 30s. How I ended up in audit is really by mistake. So I attended Case Western Reserve University, also in Cleveland, and got my first job at GE. And the leadership path there was to join GE corporate audit staff. And that really began my career in audit and my love of audit, particularly on the operational audit side, right? Which I think is really important to you guys, as far as Countalytics is concerned and, where you provide assistance to businesses. So I love, I started out in college wanting to be a doctor, an OBGYN, a caretaker. And I really consider audit actually to be the caretakers of business. So I sort of, my career went a little bit of a different route after I took a physics class. But I ended up in audit and it was a fit.
It's funny, I went to school to be an engineer, and when I took my first calculus class, I was like, I don't know if this is for me.
Yeah. I loved calculus. It's just physics. Calculus, actually, okay, nerdy fun fact, I was a calculus tutor in college.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. It just worked for me, but something about that physics in high school and in college, I was like, okay, I just don't get this. This is not for me. But it's an early life lesson of some things you just kind of get through. You don't have to master, and it's kind of a life lesson. I always talk about that as not a regret, because I'm glad I am where I am, but knowing the difference between when it's time to make a change and something that's just rough that you got to get through.
Yep, I totally agree. And as I was kind of researching what we were going to talk about today, it's funny, I almost forgot that you were at Ernst & Young. You were at EY as well.
Mm-hmm.
So how was that transition from GE to EY?
Oh, it was interesting. So it was in the world of, Sarbanes-Oxley, where they were just looking for people with a pulse who knew a little bit about accounting and audit to do that work. It was an interesting transition. I have to say, I enjoyed my time at EY. I'm a company girl. I like, being privy to what's, truly going on inside, and not to say that our clients are not, we're not upfront with us. That's not at all the case, but you catch so much more when you get invited to the all hands meeting, or, you have that staff meeting. And I really enjoy, being part of the inside team and the inside track. So, my time at Ernst & Young was really valuable to me, because coming out of GE, there was, again, it was very operational audit. I learned how to do a proper work paper at EY. EY taught me, a lot of fundamental blocking and tackling of audit. GE taught me how to be a business thinker and sort of applied audit. So I think the combination of the two set me up well.
That's funny, because I talk to my wife a lot and just about my time at Ernst & Young and being on the inside and being in those not closed door conversations, but like you said, being on the inside, having conversations. And she just says, because auditors are nosy.
Well, I think your wife is right. There is some truth to that. Yeah. What I don't miss is the creative workspaces that we would be assigned by clients. I'm sure you remember a few of those.
Mm-hmm. The closet, the linen closets, right. And the janitor closets. Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Whenever I see that scene in The Incredibles with Mr. Incredible sitting by the big water heater tank, it just reminds me of my days.
Right, exactly. So actually during my time at EY is when kind of the seeds were probably sown for Countalytics, like doing those inventories on December 31st, right? Get an understanding of county inventory. And that truthfully brought me into the tech world.
Mhm.
And you're actually, after you left EY, you almost moved into exclusively tech
Mhm.
for a couple of years. Can you talk about that transition?
That's right. So I moved into, I had a transition through manufacturing tech. So I joined a company called Nordson Corporation, awesome company. Their stock has done really, really well. But that sort of served the semiconductor industry. We had a variety of businesses there. And through that role, I was transitioned to California to be a division CFO and group controller, where that portion of the business was really focused on the tech industry. And so that was, really, really eye-opening. It was probably the nicest bridge that I could get into technology because I had to understand chips and how chipsets worked. But I also had a solid understanding of manufacturing from GE. And then, kind of life changes happen, before and during that transition, children come, before that transition, marriage comes. And, long story short, landed in Silicon Valley, where I was really immersed in tech, first in hardware, then in software, and then finally at Uber.
Okay. Yeah. And so as you talk about Uber, Uber is obviously everyone knows what Uber is. What was your role at Uber?
I was chief audit executive at Uber. So, very much the same roles. And so I had moved, once I relocated from Southern California to Northern California, I bounced back into audit, right? And so, Uber was an interesting place because it was so alive and it still is, right? I visit at least a couple of times a year to see my past colleagues. But it was alive with possibility and, changing the way that people thought about moving around in transportation and navigating a space where there were really, no laws that were fit to, govern the construct of what we were trying to deliver. So it's interesting from a risk management perspective, being chief audit executive there. It was also interesting because I was hired as the first. It was like, okay, we don't exactly know what you do, but we think we need you to be able to go public one day. So get in here and add some value. It was really as high level and simple as that. I had no, job description, so to speak, besides, okay, eventually we need, some controls in from a financial perspective, certainly building the Sarbanes-Oxley program, but, I got in where I fit in there.
Wow, that's interesting. And I think that is one thing that I've learned as just being an entrepreneur, the first time founder, is really you have to learn how to adapt. Right?
Mm-hmm.
No day is going to be the same, especially in a tech startup. And that's in a sense what Uber was. Obviously, they were very well VC funded. But what were some of your biggest challenges just coming from a very stable company like GE, like EY, to a very transitioning company and a very high growth company like Uber?
Right. I mean, I think it first starts with education, right? There were two things I was trying to do at once. You hit it right on the head, David. It's being adaptable and sort of figuring out, okay, over the next, 12 months, what's my value proposition, right? You kind of are given a rough ideas of when we, think we might go public, but you've got stuff that you can do between there, and it was still a ways off. But the first part was education, because people really didn't know what internal audit is. I actually find it to be a misnomer for our group that kind of talks about a portion of what we do. People assume that we sit behind a computer with spreadsheets and make sure all the numbers tie. And there's a component of that, right? There's an important component of that. But, there's another part of that that's really operational excellence and, working on compliance. And it's interesting to work on compliance in a space where the rules don't really apply, right, to what to what you're doing. So, I would say I had to go there and take a lay of the land, because I kept in mind the fact that I needed relationships, right, to be able to prove the value of my team and to build the value of my team. And so I needed some very early successes. And so I aligned my early projects with things that the business was really challenged with. One of those was privacy. Another piece of that is, hang on one second.
You're fine. I know those words.
Sorry, kids.
You're fine. You're good. I saw that eye like, oh.
Right.
Here they come.
Right. Like, yeah. So, and it was something crucial like, can I have a cookie?
Right,
Right.
exactly.
But the other piece was we were doing business, in China, and that can be a challenge, certainly, and certainly a technology business in China where you have very few boots on the ground and are trying to navigate a very complicated landscape. So those were the projects we started on rather than, getting into the really assurance type projects right away.
Right. And I think a lot of people don't realize, as you go to a certain level in jobs anyway, but especially in audit, like everything is based on the relationships. You're right.
Mhm.
You're not behind a computer screen doing Excel every day. You are in front of the business. You are like talking to the business owners about how they do the business. I think that's why audit is such a good uh, trampoline or springboard into other parts of the business, because when you spend a couple years in an audit group, you learn almost every part of the business, right? And as you said, that's one of the reasons again that we started Countalytics, because I understood what inventory was and what happened with inventory and what the issues were. And then we
Mhm.
say, hey, there's ways that you can add technology to fix this. So I think
Mhm.
audit is such a great place to start, and regardless of where you end up,
Mhm.
audit is a great place to start. So, oh, go ahead.
Yeah. And I would say also just your negotiation skills and sort of problem solving skills are huge, right? I mean, in audit, we are serving a certain purpose. We're serving our companies. And a lot of times the people that we have to influence don't report into us, or, don't, you really have to key in on, what truly are they trying to solve, right? And the worst thing that you can do as an auditor is bring up a bunch of stuff that's not really relevant to anything, right? And
Right.
so not everything you run across is a problem. Not everything you run across is actually worth fixing. But certain things that are the lifeblood of businesses, like inventory, certainly, which is tied to cash, and especially in the days of COVID, where people are trying to preserve cash as much as possible, those things are critically important. So, I think it's a caretaking job. It's a therapeutic job. It's also really important to be a good listener. And I think, tying it back to Countalytics and your entrepreneurship, you have to be able to listen to and understand, your potential clients' issues and be able to propose a solution in a way that they understand and can receive and feels like a viable option to solve their challenge.
Right. No, I totally agree. I totally agree. That's a great point. And that's what we try to do every day. And I know that's what you try to do every day as well, right? And so
Mhm.
how did you transition from Uber to Delta, and what pulled you away from Uber?
Wow, that was an emotional transition for me because I wasn't actually looking to make a change. I had fully intended to stay through Uber going public, and certainly beyond that for a while. There were also quite a lot of trade-offs working at Uber. I was on the older side, so our average age, I think, was 23 or 24 years old when
Yeah.
I joined, and I was already in my 40s. And so I already had children and, certainly a husband, and it was a challenge because the hours were quite demanding, and the pace of the business just didn't slow down. It was a global business with a very small team, and there was a lot to do. So I had an idea in my mind of what I wanted my next job after Uber to be. I also did want to explore moving back toward the east, probably not to Cleveland, but certainly to be in a similar time zone with my family, because that connection's very important with me. But most importantly, I'm sure people are familiar with the controversy that Uber was mired in, around the time that I left, which was about 2017. I wanted a company that was really clear on who they were and focused in on what their values were going to be. Uber was, there's the stories that hit the paper for Uber, then there was reality, and the truth is somewhere in between. But I think Uber was trying to find itself in terms of its cultural values and where it wanted to be. And I've always been a person that's really clear on, who I am as a person, what I am and I'm not going to do to win, how I treat people. And, I think that the finance organization at Uber, parts of it were a microcosm that was really good place to be. That's a long-winded way to say that I sort of had a checklist of things that I wanted in a role that was on the other side of Uber, because I knew with, my family dynamic and things like that, my days there would come to an end, and, I would want a different type of role. And, I got a call from a recruiter, and I picked it up by mistake because the area code in Atlanta is 404. The area code from back home in Cleveland was 440. So I'm like, who's calling me from home? And it was a recruiter, and they said it was Delta. And I said, oh, I know about Delta. I've never heard anything besides the fact that it was a great company. And yes, I'd like to explore this. The rest was history.
Oh, that's good. That's good. And so coming to Delta and starting at Delta, it had to be a huge transition or just difference, because starting at Uber, it was pretty much just you and you had to grow a department. Right? In Delta, you were being placed in a department that was already there and functioning. So can you talk about the differences between kind of a newer department or building a new department and then becoming a part of an established department already?
Yeah, that's really important because, in some aspects, there were similarities to the strategy of when I started at Uber. I think, when I met with my team and I said, okay, how do we want to handle this, right? How do we want to move forward? They had been under the same leader for quite a while. And we agreed that, we wanted to sort of rebrand ourselves. We wanted a bit of a transformation. There was a great foundation, laid already. I had really great people there. So I was very fortunate because, you walk into a job and, to your point, when you don't handpick everybody, you don't know what you're going to get. But luckily, my predecessor did an amazing job with her hiring. And so a lot of it was not necessarily education within our function, but it was education to the business to say, this is how we're refreshing our brand. These are some of the new things that we would like to do and new things that we want to try. We really wanted to have a focus on data analytics. So it was more of a metamorphosis of the department. I don't want to say necessarily a transformation. A lot of people use that word. I was working with a base that was already good. We just wanted to spread our wings and truly integrate with the business. I mean, we talked a little bit earlier about listening and really being out there. So we built things like business engagement models so that we had a pulse on what's going on, because as the rate of change happens, and Delta was enjoying a heyday, right? And so there was a lot of investments going on in the business, a lot of innovation, some technology upgrades happening, and we wanted to be in the middle of that and add value. And our goal on those projects is we wanted to build it right. The other piece, David, of what I did there was just made sure everybody was in the right seat. We had some really great talent where their jobs weren't quite aligned to, in my opinion, where their gifts were. And we saw some pretty dramatic transformations, and I can use that word in this case, of individuals who were just given a new charter, and they sort of took off and not to be cliche, but got their wings, so to speak. So, it was a little bit of a metamorphosis, a bit of a makeover. And, I'm really proud of the work that we've done as a team together.
That's good. That's amazing. That's amazing. And you talked about some of the challenges that you were faced with at Uber as you're growing a company that is in really a brand new industry, uncharted territories. Now you go to a very established company, 80, 90 years old, right? That's very established, very well known, very strong brand. It's already a global company. Can you talk about some of the challenges that you had coming to Delta that I'm sure were just totally vastly different than what you faced at Uber?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, it's a much different culture, for sure. So Delta is a lot more formal than Uber was, which wasn't necessarily a challenge. It was just an adjustment. Hierarchy and some spaces can be really, really important. I think it was really important that I understood people and personalities, always understanding who I'm across the table with, because there's such a vast array. I think at Uber, this might be surprising, but it was, as far as the interaction, that experience was homogenous because it was informal. It was loose. We were all in our jeans and, and in a t-shirt, and
Right.
we were all doing this. But, at Delta, you've got certain leaders who, are very structured process people and maybe very formal. And then you've got certain leaders who are informal, and learning those personalities to build those relationships was certainly a thing that I had to do. Some of the other challenges at Delta is, Delta had gone through a very difficult period in time. And some of the thinking from those times, sort of transcended. And I think if you come in without a lot of empathy to that thinking, you can be very quick to judge, what you see in place from a process perspective. And so I think also appreciating the history and not being overwhelmed by, some of the projects that needed to be done as a result of a period of, pretty limited investment, is something that, if you don't keep it in the right perspective, it could be overwhelming. I joined, right after the data center crashed in 2016. I come from the world of pristine, geeked out data centers that,
Right.
have redundancy upon redundancy upon redundancy. And so, just, taking one day at a time and just saying, okay, we're part of a phase and we're building, and, the operation, because it's so excellent and because we're so great at what we do, had taken off, and a lot of the infrastructure was still catching up. But all of that makes for a really fascinating job. I'll also say, it's always going to be an additional layer of challenge for those who have never met me. I'm a woman of color. And I think that presents its own unique challenges. I'm a working mother. That presents its own unique challenges in the workplace, and those follow you from place to place, and they look different depending on which environment you're in. And so, I've had to navigate some things throughout the year. I never say balancing, but integrating, life as a mother, right? And having certain obligations at home, with trying to be excellent and as on point as I can at work.
Yeah, that's a very great point. And we'll talk about that in a second. I think so. One of your earlier points is, it's just a difference, right? It's not necessarily a total transition. It's just a rebranding, or you're learning something different, but your core values, how you feel as a person, is still the same. That's one thing, excuse me, that we realized as well. As we started looking at companies, you see a very big difference in how things are handled in your newer upstart companies and then your more traditional companies, right? It's just not necessarily slower, but there's just might be you need a couple more yeses to get things done, right?
That's right.
And we see that as well as we kind of transition a little bit, still focus on helping airlines with inventory, but also hospitals. We see they are very similar as far as how bureaucratic things can be. But I think you adapt, right? You have to learn, like, here's how we deal with certain people. But one thing you said as a Black female working in corporate America, and being a very high level position, how has 2020 changed, right? Like with everything that's going on now, with COVID stuff on top of, or Black Lives Matter on top of COVID, or COVID on top of Black Lives Matter, however you want to say it. Those are the kind of two major issues we've been dealing with, I think, for the last 6 months, that have really slapped people in the face, that whether you wanted to deal with it or not, you're kind of forced to. So how would you say that you kind of face those challenges, being an executive, being a Black mom in the South?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's so much going on. And so first of all, just giving myself some grace to say, wow, this is really overwhelming, because you've got COVID, which has had a disproportionate effect on the airline industry and air travel. When people feel safe, when there is a viable vaccine, I think that's when we will start to see people return to the skies. And I don't know which is first, right? People could start feeling safe before a vaccine is out there. But it's emotional seeing the level of impact that COVID has had at Delta. This particular week has been an emotional week because we had over 17,000 people take an early exit package. And for many of those folks, tomorrow is going to be their last day at Delta. I was in the office actually earlier today. Mainly I'm working from home, and, sitting around relatively empty halls, just thinking, I know that this is not how folks, anticipated their last day, particularly those who were retiring, to be. So I think it all starts with grace and understanding that we're all going through a difficult period. I also think recognizing the opportunity that the Black Lives Matter movement has presented, right? It's shown another light on some of the challenges that we face as people of color in the United States, and it's all very deep and complicated, and there's no silver bullet that's going to get us there. But what we need to do is start with conversation and move very quickly to action. I've never been in my career shy about speaking about diversity and how important it is. As a person of color, I've always understood how important it is to build diverse teams. You get better outcomes, and that's on more than a surface level, right? That saying has become cliche, but I understand very deeply because I'm a person of color who receives information from the world through the lens of a person of color, and I have observed directly that sometimes my reaction to something can be different than my white counterparts, right? So I think that there's an opportunity here to and to require companies to take action as far as being vocal in certain movements towards diversity and inclusion. I've been proud of some of the public things that Delta has done. We raised the Black Lives Matter flag. We've got a lot of signage in support of the movement, right? Black Lives Matter up and down the freeways here in Atlanta. And so, that makes me extremely proud. But it also reinforces my responsibility, not just to hire diverse teams, because it's one thing to get them in the door, but it is how do you encourage them and nurture them? How do you create a support system around women, people of color, LGBTQI, that community, so that we all feel like we can bring our best gifts to work. But again, we've all got to take a step back and understand that this is a very overwhelming, period in history, and just one thing at a time.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. That's very well said, and I will commend Delta because as the issues came out all over the news, you had certain companies step up and release statements. And I think what the Delta CEO Ed Bastian did was very early and released a statement. I think that was very, very on message and very on point, right? And I think it resonated with a lot of people. I think it did a really good job.
Right.
So,
And we need to follow that up with action. Our executive ranks are not as diverse as they need to be. I mean, that's no secret. Right. And so, there's some real action to follow, the statements and the words. One more thing, and I want to just mention this. I am so blessed and in a very unique position because I have two bosses. One is the CFO of Delta Airlines, but the other is the chair of the audit committee of the board of directors, who also is an African American man. And so that is a very unusual thing. And, it's the first time in my career that that's ever happened, where I've had, a boss that's in a position like that, who is a man of color. And so I do take advantage of, when I need that advice, he has stepped in and been that mentor to me. And I want to pay that forward because I know that is a unique position. In my 20 plus years career, I've never had it. So I want it, and I try and take advantage of it, and I pass it on.
no, that's amazing. And I think that's really some of the keys to success, really. Like I don't think people realize, or as many people do, as the value of having a mentor, right? And whether that mentor doesn't always have to be your same color, your same race. Like you have to have someone that you can confide in, because we all are vulnerable and we all get scared.
Right.
And a lot of times you don't know what's around the corner. You don't know what's going to happen. It took a big leap of faith to move to Atlanta with your whole family to say, okay, now I'm going to try this, right?
Right.
Just like with us, we talk about this all the time. It took a big leap of faith to leave a secure, somewhat secure, like corporate job, right? And to start a company. And when you talk about kind of Black leaders, I think that's one of the things that we try to commend as much as we do when we go into office, to say, hey, having a Black leader is something that we don't take for granted, or a leader of color, or a female leader, like just a minority leader, I think is very, very important. So what would the young Brandi tell, or what would the younger Brandi, you're young, what would the younger Brandi young
Yeah.
Brandi tell the younger Brandi now just about getting to where you are, or being true to yourself and navigating through these tough times?
Mm-hmm. You know, I would have told myself early in my career, that's your time to understand who you are and what works for you. But I honestly, you know, I really feel that early on in your career, you should get as much experience as humanly possible, um, because a career is a long time, right? And I'm very fortunate in that, you know, I truly feel that I could do what I do for the rest of my career as long as I'm adding value. There could be, you know, a time where it's time for me to move on. I'm dated and my skills are needed in another place. I'm okay with that, right? I would also say, to not be so hard on yourself, to give yourself a break, through, you know, getting married, through, I have two children, through becoming a mother once and then twice over. You can't expect your life to work the way it did before after those things, right? You know, you've got to make adjustments. It's not just about working harder. It's about putting the infrastructure in place to support yourself. You know, I would also say, and this goes back to kind of my earlier childhood, which, you know, was a little bit rough growing up. I would say, you know, you're going to have an opportunity to write a story, right? And there's a song that I love. It's called "A Note to My Younger Self," and part of it is in Spanish, but it says, "The world is going to give you flowers. You're paying for it now, but understand that, you know, down the road, the world is going to give you roses."
No, that's pretty. That's really pretty. So before we end, and Brian slaps me, I know we have to talk about inventory a little bit.
Yep.
So as and we can edit some of this out as you feel the need, Brian. But
Mhm.
as we talked about a little bit about some of the challenges, while I was in the airline industry, what I realized is from an inventory perspective, like there were a lot of needs, or a lot of things that could have been you could add technology to and make processes more efficient, right? And that's
Mhm.
one of the reasons we started Conalytics, and one of the reasons that we focus on the airline industry, or very intentionally. Can you
Mhm.
talk a little bit about some of your overall inventory type challenges
Sure.
that you've dealt with, that you've seen,
Right.
and not
Well,
necessarily in the airline, just overall.
yeah, overall. Well, I'll tell you, one of my first memories of doing inventory related work was back in my manufacturing days, where, you know, it was a raw materials plant, and it was something like minerals and things, and there were just piles and piles of coal, and, you know, I don't even know what I was climbing on top of, and, you know, having to do those inventory projects and being like, man, if I'd have known today was going to be like this, I'd have worn different shoes. Right? So certainly I would have loved to use a technology like Countalytics so that I didn't have to be all up in the rafters. You know, I think transitioning to an airline, or working for an airline, just think of everything that needs to go on an aircraft before, you know, the people are loaded on it. You know, there's glass, well, in the days before COVID, right? And even in the days after COVID, it's just a different type of service,
Right,
right? You know, the prepackaged meals, the blankets, the pillows, everything that has to go on. And you replicate that across the world. And that's quite a bit of cash tied up in those items, and you want to make sure that they're represented correctly. I mean, you've made a big investment in those items to make your customers comfortable, and also you've got distributed places all over, you know, the globe housing these things and waiting to restock the aircraft. And so, you know, it's really important to have an accurate count, especially since we've been doing a lot of transformation in the airline, and we had been bringing in processes where we would normally outsource, which means, guess what? We own that inventory,
right,
and we
right.
doggone sure better know what the value is of that inventory. Also, I will say, you know, from an audit perspective, in a world of COVID, you know, you want to limit contact as much as possible. And so technologies like Countalytics can allow you to do those things. A lot of times you aren't going to be able to reach out and touch and feel, but if you have an imaging technology that can help you understand what you're looking at, in a location, on a shelf, or that can help you understand, whether you've built a beverage cart, to compliance, whether that's stocked the right way, especially as we're making changes as it relates to COVID. There are certain things that are no longer carried on the aircraft. All of those things are important. So inventory is vital, both from a internal health of the business perspective, but also from a service perspective, and giving our customers the very best experience they can have on board.
Yeah, I would agree with the post-COVID thing. What we've seen a lot of interest in hospitals as well, just having a touchless system, right? Where I don't have to put my hand on each type of inventory. I can take a picture of it and count it, and a much cleaner environment, a lot less worry, right? Less worry. So yeah, we've seen it a lot, and we'll see what the future will bring. I think it is very interesting nowadays. Everybody is in a point of transition, and where we'll end up, I think, will be very interesting. But I think everybody who has a good attitude of be somewhat optimist, I think we'll all end up in a better place.
I agree with that, David.
Well, Brandi, this has been great. I thank you so much for your time. You've been a great interviewee. I was telling Brian I'm jealous because I should have wore an Adidas jersey as well.
Hey, that's how I roll. I've got tracksuits in blue, red, white, black. Yes, I'm an Adidas tracksuit kind of girl.
Nothing wrong with that.
And right now I'm wearing the Stella McCarthy Adidas.
I see it. I saw it.
Yeah,
I see it. Yep.
McCarthy Adidas collaboration.
Yep. I like that one. But seriously, thank you so much for your time and your thoughtful words. I will share it throughout once we post it, and we'll make sure that you're updated.
Well, best of luck to you and Countalytics. I think the technology is absolutely fantastic, and that's the business that's good business, which is solving problems for organizations. And I just think it's fantastic what you guys are doing.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it.